Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Next-Gen Mentoring Technology Transfer Workshop. We will talk about technology transfer. First presenter will be Alexander Sirois from Unico. He will talk about from lab to market guides, beneficiaries through the key steps of turning research results into market-ready innovation. And after him, Andrew will present his spin-off MegaSense. Okay, Alexander, you have a word.
Thank you, David. I'm just going to share my screen here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. Today, I'll be walking you through some of our experience here at Unico of developing deep tech startups. If someone could just let me know if they see my screen. I won't be seeing you now that I'm in presentation mode, so please feel free to just speak over me or interrupt me at any moment because I won't be able to see if you have your hands raised. So if someone could just confirm that you see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to start off the presentation with a little use case, maybe slightly familiar to some of you, or at least the technology might be. This is PSP Technologies. Plasma shock peening is what the PSP stands for. And this is somewhat of a success story. Well, it's questionable whether it's a success yet. The company is now entering its seed round. It's successfully closed the seed round. So I guess you could say that it's moving along. This is a technology that can be used to strengthen the durability of metals, first and foremost, with a variety of use cases that has a global patent. And the researchers are still in sort of the research positions for the most part. So it shows that you can sit on both chairs to some degree. Originally, they had raised 250,000 euros in pre-seed fundraising, although I'll tell you a little story about that too in a second. PSP symbolizes, in this case, a story of what a good license can look like, what good validation can be, what happens when you add some business acumen to a research team already. But still, I would just add a caveat there that the process remains very slow and the company is still consistently validating. So when I say a good license, in this case, it was actually the institution's first license at the time. This is one of the Czech technical universities, and there really was a lot of give and take in negotiating the license. And one of the ways that we managed to resolve sort of the Gordian knot that is aligning incentives and ensuring that IP is managed in a way that really serves its purpose is to create a back license, or a dual license, as it's also sometimes referred to. This, in our view, is a best practice that truly should be considered by more research institutions. So for context, that means that when the research institution has some sort of academic research on this IP, on this technology, that then that IP yields to the company, and vice versa. When the company has some new IP that it's developed based on the original IP, that yields then back to the research institute for academic purposes. In terms of good validation, we'll be covering business validation later on in the presentation. As you can imagine, and this is one of the most exciting things about deep tech and working with science in general, is that there are several applications for a technology that can strengthen the durability of metals. So first and foremost, of course, the research team had some experience working at Skoda, so they thought, let's see how we can integrate this into the automobile industry. And it was a very assumptions-based approach, and it was taking a very long time, and they weren't getting anywhere. And it wasn't until we did quite substantive validation interviews, understanding where the pain points are greatest for this, that we came down to the first use case that they would end up commercializing. And they've since moved on to several different use cases, including space and including defense. But the first use case that really made the money was, if you can believe it or not, the packaging industry. So Coca-Cola, for instance, has metal molds that form the actual plastic bottles, and you can use them let's say orders of magnitude of 1,000 or 10,000 times. Now, if you can improve the amount of usage by about 20%, then you've achieved a significant saving for the packaging company. And so that ended up being the first application. But it really took a lot of, first and foremost, learning the hard way, assumptions-based approaches for the team to finally realize, okay, we need to be a little bit more structured. We need to engage with industry and understand what industry's needs are. So if I drive anything home today, it should be that validation is a process that should begin at ideation and should never really end. And you should continue to validate every new product and every new application with industry and let them be the pulling and pushing force of demand. Now, another instance of PSP that perhaps is inspiring is we helped set up the company, and one of the original grants that the whole company was meant to be built around fell through due to some silly administrative reasons, which I'm sure some of you have probably experienced yourselves with public funding. And the two of the co-founders of Unico, who were helping set up the company, were already on their way actually to the court registry to wind up the company, to close everything down, when they got a phone call from one of the researchers that's still in the research institution to say that he had somehow found, through friends, family, and the last fools, a couple of €100,000 that would be able to keep the company alive. So I guess the point here is that there's a very fine line between failure and success, and it actually takes a lot of iterations and a lot of pivoting and a willingness to be able to hear that criticism and pivot before you get there. I find this image rather illustrative as well. Just for context, it took about 10 different tries before I could convince ChatGPT to put a woman on all of the images. Usually, no matter how many tries, there was always a man on the side of success. So that tells us something about implicit bias in AI as well. And this rather famous image, illustrative as it is, could perhaps show PSP, and I'm sure a lot of science projects, maybe some of your own, that have been very close to finding the right application or unlocking the needs of industry, but for whatever which reason quit too soon. So the point is that commercializing research is a very lengthy, is a very resource intensive. And when I say resource, I don't just mean money, I mean also time, and I mean your energy and mental and physical capacity to actually get to a point where you fully commercialized and where you have a spin-off that is a full functioning company. Although, I'm mentioning spin-offs a lot, but there are other ways to commercialize research, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit more today. This is Unico, minus the 3 people that work in the Zagreb office, of which I am a member. We were on our way from Zagreb to Prague and stopped a few too many times for coffees to be in this picture. So Unico, what we do, perhaps closest to home is for academia, where we do a lot of early market validation, market and regulatory analyses, but also IP services, ranging from IP valuations to freedom to operate, novelty searches. We can even do patents registration, that is. For startups, we do a lot of due diligence, company valuations, business validations, and other IP services. And for corporations, so larger companies, which I will show you a few of them in the next slide, we do a lot of things such as tech scouting and expert scouting, but also IP optimization. So I would love if you all connected with me later, because I may be needing some of your research down the line for a big company that wishes to do some tech scouting. Because we do a lot of tech scouting and expert scouting for the corporations, we also believe that helps us do early market validation for researchers and for companies as well. And our markets of activity span from the Baltics. So we have an office in Poland and in Czech Republic, where I'm at the moment, and then in Zagreb. So covering everything from the Baltics down to the Adriatic and even the Aegean. And these are some of those companies that I mentioned we work with. If you're looking to cooperate with any of them, please feel free to drop me a line afterwards, and I can see if I can connect you. This I just want to throw in there. This is a European-funded program that we are a part of. If you or your research institute have had any projects that derive from a widening or a cost action, we can actually offer you free commercialization services. So that's helping you define your unique value, helping you validate with industry, helping you define an IP strategy, even negotiate your licensing terms with the institute or with a potential industry partner, helping with some standardization, but also getting you in rooms with investors and industry partners to help you scale your innovation. So if you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me afterwards as well. So moving on. The key factors behind success, if you will, in our view, are, of course, business validation from day one. So making sure that you know exactly who wants to buy your product, but more so than who wants, because everyone will tell you that they want a product, who needs your product. Secondly, and I can't stress this enough, second and third tied together, is a committed team that is open to learning fast and pivoting, but also that is dedicated to execution. and able to manage their mental and physical capacities so that they can withstand the several sprints that are within the marathon of commercializing science. Now, great science, it's really important to remember I'm having this conversation a lot with researchers when we're helping them build their businesses. It's only the starting point. You know, very often I hear, I have a patent, I have a business, but really that's only the beginning. Where the real commercialization comes from is learning through feedback, being resilient to know what feedback is good and which ones you should probably ignore or deprioritize, but also ensuring that the customer ultimately is satisfied, that you've really solved the pain point of their own, and not only that you've solved it in a way that is more efficient, because very often I hear a lot of researchers focusing on the efficiency side, but also more cost effective very often. So it's not just enough to have the fastest actuator. Sometimes it's also good to have an actuator that is fast and cost effective, that we can actually afford to integrate into industry or into consumer use cases. Now, whenever I'm giving these presentations, or whenever I'm asked to give these presentations, I'm asked for a step-by-step guide, and I'm afraid to say that today you will not be getting that. Going from lab to market is a question of non-linearity and chaos, and that is something that if there's one thing you leave leave this presentation with today, it really is that everything needs to be validated and revalidated. Now, I had ChatGPT make me a graphicon of what this process may look like. Here we see that innovation and product development is iterative, it's non-linear. It's a question of gaining market insights, a question of understanding how regulation is going to impact your go-to-market, where the funding is and what kind of funding you should be accessing, who your industry partners will be to help you integrate to industry, but also to help you validate some of your core assumptions and develop a product that they actually want. And then finally, of course, adding value through sales and understanding your customers. Still, I would argue that this doesn't summarize the path to market enough. It's much more akin to this. And then I would highlight here the unexpected customer, harkening back to the PSP case study in which they found they could make a lot more money selling this solution to an industry that, let's be honest, is relatively unsexy, packaging and bottling, ensuring that Coca-Cola can make more Coca-Cola bottles for cheaper. Probably doesn't sound like the first thing you would try to apply this very high-tech technology to. You'd probably think about spacecraft or increasing the impenetrability of a tank armor, but certainly not making Sprite bottles and Fanta. So be open to the unexpected customer, and if anything, try to seek them out, because very often those will be the customers that need you most, and those will be the market fits that you find actually most seamless. Now, just to ground us all in some reality, unfortunately, most startups fail. And these statistics apply more generally to startups. The statistics for deep tech or for science-based innovation is much more favorable. But still, 63% of tech startups, these numbers are from 2024, 63% of tech startups annually fail in the first 5 years. And the fail rate is much higher for medtech, for instance, or biotech for that matter. Most first-time founders also fail. There is an 18% success rate, and therefore the team is really critical. I'd like to sort of hammer home, and I'll touch on this again later, that single founders are very often a great start. They have a clear vision. They can steer the innovation in the direction that it needs to go most effectively. But longer term, it takes a village to raise a child. And it not only is a detriment to the company sometimes to have a single founder that insists on their vision, but also to the single founder themselves can it sometimes be detrimental to be the only one that's sort of leading the fore. I've seen an unfortunate amount increasingly of first founders that experience burnout, and that's something I'd really love for you all to internalize and keep an eye out if you do decide to open a spin-off. Now, going back to the business validation, 42% of startups fail due to a lack of market need. And that's simply because, in my view, people aren't asking their clients what they need, or they're not asking their clients and the potential customers and end users in the right ways. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So I wouldn't dwell on that too much. Moving on to the lab to market components. Again, this is not a step-by-step, but if we could sort of summarize into certain baskets, first and foremost, of course, we assume that you have excellence. You have a scientific output that few have managed to achieve, or achieving it in different ways, and that is your uniqueness, and that is your defensible, very often the core of your defensibility as a company. Then there's market knowledge, so understanding both the problem that you seek to address and the way in which you address it. Then comes the business validation. So building hypotheses about whether you actually solve the problem with your solution, understanding, how this hypothesis, how this solution is relevant, how much people are willing to pay, how an actual business model may work for this particular solution. Do people expect it to be out-licensed? Do people expect it to be sort of paid based on savings, or just simply a product that you sell to them and then they sell on? Is it a product that they integrate? So all of these questions must be asked, and we must figure out how and why somebody should be using our product or innovation. And of course, remembering to pivot if we can't find the right fit. Last but not least is execution. And within this, I would include soft skills. Soft skills, of course, is something that we can all work on. Some of us are born, or some of us grow up with varying degrees of soft skills. But I would add to soft skills, having a team around you that is able to actually deliver this, and having an interdisciplinary team, perhaps more importantly, that understands, how a sales process looks like, that has thick enough skin to be rejected 1,000 times by business validation partners. Somebody that understands, the legal aspects of an industry, but also the legal aspects of your IP, what you can and cannot publish, how to maintain a trade secret policy. These kinds of questions are very key to maintaining that defensibility that we mentioned as part of your scientific excellence. Now, once again, please, if you have any questions, we'll address them at the end, but feel free to chime in at any time, just interrupt me, and we can stop and talk about your questions. Now, here I have a Slido. If you could scan this QR code with your phones, it should lead you to a link, and I'd love to just hear some of your impressions as to, what is most difficult in research commercialization. Let me know if you're having any issues with the poll. And if you haven't had an experience, then I'd love to hear, what you think might be difficult. Funds, yes. Funds comes up a lot. Although I would say this depends on the region as well, very much so. There's an abundance of funds, at least in Croatia and Slovenia at the moment, for deep tech capital, for deep tech development, and the same applies to Poland and Czech Republic. Focus, monetization, law. Law is an interesting one, because I suppose it could mean, internal laws within the faculty, but also, of course, in terms of IP, setting up companies, depends on the jurisdiction, time. Yeah. It's hard to be both a researcher and a commercial officer at the same time. Information is hard to come by, and technology transfer officers are doing their best, and everyone's trying to improve their capacities, but still, that they could be offering you more sort of service-oriented services, education around funding sources, different regulations. Yeah, industry partner is also difficult to source. Okay, this very much aligns with a lot of the responses that I often get. Like I said, maybe I would add IP here, so understanding, maybe what to protect, when to protect it, why you've protected it. Very often the case. Funds, of course, across the board comes up very often. Bureaucratic barriers, yes, this is perhaps linked to the internal laws and regulations of institutions and tech transfer offices, though I think it's changing. I would say, funding can feel very elusive, and it certainly is hard to live off of these grant funding cycles in which you're applying for a grant and then you're doing the work and you're waiting for the next grant. But there is, if anything, too much risk capital in the market right now, at least as far as Central Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Well, Slovenia and Croatia, I'm counting here as Southeastern Europe. There's really an abundance of funding, so it's a good time to be spinning off if you're looking to commercialize in that way. All right. Well, thank you for your responses. I hope we can discuss later at the end. Now, I said there aren't going to be steps, but there will be principles to lab to market and the components that are needed. Now, I really like this this drawing. Some of you may have seen some version of it. I guess, I'd be curious to hear if anyone feels comfortable speaking up, what the difference is between a prototype and an MVP. Perhaps if anybody doesn't know what the MVP is, it's the minimum viable product. All right. So, in a nutshell, the prototype is the first time you've created something that works in a lab or real world setting. And the MVP is the first time somebody is actually willing to pay for it. So it's a viable product. And, a lot of people feel that once they've achieved the prototype, they've actually achieved the product. In reality, this is not a straight line. This is sort of, if I could illustrate it, a squiggly line that's going back and iterating on itself. Research and development will continue throughout business design as well. But business design also, in my view, should begin at the same point as research and development, or at least very early on, even at the idea stage. Something that we've done in Croatia and I've seen has had a significant impact on the way research is being commercialized is adding a mandatory commercialization component or impact component to all of the research projects. So at the idea phase, you need to be thinking about the potential products. And the sooner you do this, even at this kind of micro level of just sitting there and ideating, what problem does this solve? How might somebody want to buy this? Is very, very important. And it would be my recommendation. And that's when we work with researchers, what we very often do is to take your idea, to have 3 to 4 conversations with potential industry partners, just trying to understand what challenges they're facing and trying to understand whether your idea could resolve one of those. So build for market first instead of building from sort of theory or assumptions based. There's a brilliant adage in English that I grew up with far too much, and that's when you assume, you make an ass of you and me. So again, remembering that the sooner you talk to industry, the sooner you have that input, the shorter this process will also be. Now, if anybody's familiar with these innovation horizons, I wouldn't spend too much time on it, but most people think in deep tech that where we belong is in Horizon 3, so disruptive innovation of some sort. And I guess if I had to illustrate the rather gray distinctions between the different horizons, Horizon 1 would be some sort of improvement on a car, so windshield wipers that wipe automatically. Horizon 2 would perhaps be a new innovation, so a car that doesn't run on gas but runs on electricity or hydrogen. And then Horizon 3 would be a flying car. Now, it's essential to remember that most innovation actually occurs in Horizon 1 and Horizon 2. And very often, I see researchers come and say, this is the first time that anybody's ever done something this way. This is a scientific breakthrough, and that is fantastic. But very often it's actually hardest to be in Horizon 3. And why is that? First and foremost, there isn't a market that's developed yet. You sort of need to do a lot of heavy lifting to explain to people what the technology is and what it solves. And sometimes that's actually a rather ungrateful place to be. And what you really want to do is to be in a place where, there's innovation that's kind of known, but you're solving it in a way that nobody has solved it before, and you're doing that much more efficiently, both in terms of time and in resources. So every problem is somehow solved today, even if it's unsatisfactory, and we need to know, how it's being solved so that we can position our solution. So that's going back to really understanding what the market need is. Market knowledge is key to this, and I quite like this little cartoon, which I think leads us into business validation, and that is, what does the data tell us to do? We only have bad data on this. Does the bad data suggest we should do what we wanted to do anyways? Well, yes, that's called good data. Unfortunately, this is time and time again how a lot of companies, startups that aren't based in science also kind of start. This is implicit bias. We all have it. We're all driven by it to some degree. And confirmation bias, of course, is part of that too. It's very, very important to be checking your assumptions throughout the way. And the best way to do that, of course, is not only to talk to industry, but also first and foremost to ensure that you understand sort of at a theoretic level, what is going on? What are sort of at the high level? What are the trends in an industry? Who are the key players in industry? What is the development in terms of technology? And a good way to look at that also is to understand which patents are around the corner. Very often when we're doing market research and we're trying to understand sort of the foundation that then we could build our validation assumptions on, we're looking at patents. So looking at patent databases, we use PatSnap. You've probably also used DispaceNet or Orbit, and understanding, what is in the phase of publication and application, what has recently been granted, what has been licensed out, what has been withdrawn, or what has been abandoned due to non-payment. Using patents as sort of a market orienteer can really help you get that added edge, because most people are looking at market research reports. This is the size of the market, these are the key players, and they're all developing this new product. But if you look at the patents, you can kind of scratch underneath the surface and really understand what those new products are meant to be and why they're developing them. And perhaps, maybe not understanding what the market of a year or two is, but the market of 6 to 10 years is. So market knowledge, to summarize, is about turning your excellence into a USP. So that's understanding the value chain and the regulation that sits before you, understanding the competition, and then understanding the customer. And I would add to customer the end users as well, because very often I see this conflated, the customer and the end user. The customer is the person that's going to purchase the product, but very often the end user is going to be different. And perhaps going back to maybe the auto industry, you're building a component for a car, the customer is Skoda Auto, but the actual end user is going to be the person that interacts with your innovation on a day-to-day basis, and they may have slightly different needs and slightly different expectations as well. So it's important to keep that in mind and really understand who you are selling to and the language of the person you are selling to, not so much the person who is using it in the end. So this is an illustrative graph of where value is added. We can see at the two far ends of the smiling curve, we have the R&D. On the other hand, we have sales and after sales. Now this is where, in theory, you make the most money for the most input. Of course, R&D costing much more than sales and after service, but making sort of a similar amount. Manufacturing being at the bottom. So where most of you are is in the R&D phase, and it's not always necessary nor advised to cover all of the elements of the smiling curve or the value chain rather. Very often you can stay in R&D and you can have some sort of sales force, and therefore you're in the two highest valued segments, but you don't actually engage with any of the other components. You outsource that or out-license that to somebody else. That would be the perfect deep tech scenario if you ask me. Now, value chains, I want to just, I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, but I just want to explain a little bit the concept of them and how within sort of a supply chain, you will have value chains of their own. So, here, this is, of course, the agriculture industry. It looks more like fruits and food and various food consumables. So we have the inputs, and then we go all the way to the distribution and the marketing. And of course, the people that are making the most money are those that are in distribution and marketing most likely. Although I would guess that in terms of margins, making pretty high margins in packaging and processing as well. The people ultimately that are likely making the least amount of money are the ones providing the raw inputs. So the seeds, the fertilizers, potentially, maybe not the fertilizers. And as you go down, you can see the value increase. Now, even within these value chains, so within the value chains for instance, agrochemicals, you will have subsequent value chains, supply chains that also impact, where the most value is created. In order to create some sort of fertilizer, I need several different material inputs, some natural, some synthetic. I need sort of very specialized equipment to be able to produce and process the fertilizers. I need a logistics supply chain to be able to bring the inputs and sell the outputs. So it's really important to understand, where within the value chain your technology would belong, and then to validate, whether it fits best here, providing, technology for the input producers, whether it fits perhaps later on within the packaging and cold storage, and really understanding the specific needs of each and every one of them. Very often with deep tech or with science, you will have an application that can be used in most of these nodes. And the first commercial sort of project that you should pursue very often should be the one that has the highest upside with the lowest input, if you will. So the one that will make you the most amount of money the fastest, without spending too much money and too much time, of course, is what that means. Now here's an example, just to help flesh out the value chain. So here we have stents for gastroenterology and pneumology. The market position is that they export 90%, but only at the European market, which means that their market share is relatively 1%, and the products are sold mostly to the end user. So that's the hospital. So here you can see that this company is most active in sort of the R&D and in the market opportunistically. So they engage in R&D, commercialization, design. They also engage in sales, marketing, branding, logistics, but they don't touch any of the logistics. They outsource rather not logistics, but the manufacturing. And that is a way to stay rather lean, and to have sort of the highest yield. So if you can find a way for your science to be applied in this manner and commercialized in this manner, you're most likely to have one of the easier businesses, not necessarily the best, because there can be a lot of upside in manufacturing. I just wouldn't recommend it to you. It's quite a bit of a hassle. So here we see that on the tiers we have another company producing very simple cables. Their biggest input here is metals, and they sell them to producers of electrical installations. So here, in this case, they're engaging in the design and the manufacturing. So they actually have relatively less upside because they're not engaged in the sales. They're not even engaged so much in the R&D. They would have an electrical installation company tell them, oh, we need so-and-so specs, and we would like them at this price, and then they need to find a way to produce them at those specs and within that price. So this is a rather bloody business I wouldn't want to be part of. Then here on the far end of things, we have heavy machines for construction. So these guys export almost everything. They have a market share of about 10%, so they're in the top performers in the world, and their products are only sold to construction firms via a second company, so via a mother company. So in this case, they're covering the entire value chain, but they've diversified their sales and marketing so that they can sell to other producers as well, who can then have white label solutions of their products too. So it's this hopefully illustrates the variety of business models, but also the complexities of value chains for you. So summarizing some of the key principles, it's really important to understand where you belong in the value chain, to understand who is who and who makes the decisions. It really is essential that in those validation interviews, you try to get, at least on the first call, or if not in the first call, then through the first call, get the contact of the people that actually make the decision to purchase, be it heads of procurement, be it heads of R&D, to understand what the potential bottlenecks are and the path dependencies. So, very often we've designed technology in one certain way, and it's kind of, it becomes somewhat sticky, becomes somewhat entrenched and hard to change. We've just gotten used to doing things in one way, and convincing someone to do them another is sometimes not always worth it. And then finally, of course, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the regulatory pathways. So understanding, how regulation is going to impact not only your product design, but also your road to market. How much money, how much time, how many interactions with regulatory bodies, how those interactions may be changed from market to market, what your potential customers and end users will expect very often, by way of certification, sometimes by standardization as well. So it's really important to take stock of all of these questions as early as possible so that you know how to design your commercial innovation once it gets to that phase. Now, I'd like to briefly touch on a use case that we work with quite closely. This is NextAIRE, and NextAIRE began as an at-home testing kit for diabetics. Effectively, you would have a small box, maybe about yay big, that you could fit on your desk, almost like an air humidifier, and you would have to take a single prick. Just with a little knife, take a little scalpel, whatever they may be called, you take a small prick of blood, you put a single drop of blood into the machine, and it gives you a variety of metrics. Now, of course, the diabetic market, very saturated, it's healthcare, so the regulation, very expensive, very long. But this was the direction in which the research team decided to go, because this is something that A, felt natural to them, B, they had some experience in. So this is what they spent the first few years on. and it simply wasn't going. They had spoken to industry. The doctors kept telling them, this is great, this solves a huge pain point. The diabetics kept telling them, yes, this is amazing, I'd love to buy it. But we realized very quickly, once the company hired us, we spoke to the same people again, and it was very often about the way that the team was framing the questions. Would you buy this? Yes, of course I'd buy this. Do you like this? Yes, of course I like this. But does it really solve a pain point? I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen those little, arm monitors for diabetes, or the little the pocket monitors that you can take, again, a single drop more or less, and you can find out in real time where your blood's at. It wasn't really in the right market. It didn't have the right market fit. So through a variety of desk research, so understanding, what the potential markets are, where this might work, potentially some veterinary solutions, maybe some other sort of analytics for personal health care, for home care as well. We deduced that there was a very significant market of lab mice and rats in the Czech Republic. A shocking number, if I'm not mistaken. I think about 4 or 5 million mice are killed a year in labs in the Czech Republic. We realized that a very significant amount of them were being killed because of disease control, but also because of the amounts of blood that could be taken from them. So for certain tests, you could take blood once or twice, and then essentially the mouse is too deplenished that you can't really treat it as as viably a control group anymore, especially as genetic modified mice. And sometimes you have to stop using it, sometimes you kill it, but also that it was rather hard to track sort of the mice that were sick, and to do the population control. So there was a lot of sort of unnecessary wastage of mice, if you will. And so the pivot through validation became clear, and that was to take this single drop analytic and use it on lab rats and lab mice. And that is actually the indication that the company continues to commercialize quite successfully. There was much less regulatory constraints, the cost was much less, the pain point was very clear, but also it was ultimately, again, relatively compared to personalized healthcare, a much easier market to compete in. There was just simply less entrenched competition, and therefore the research team was able to find a footing. And now I believe they're in their 3rd year of commercializing it in this way rather successfully. So if you fail at first, try again. It's incredibly important also to understand who you're competing with, and here I mean not only direct competition. So who else has an analytic for blood, but also maybe are there other solutions that maybe solve the same problem? Is it maybe enough that people have access to ready blood analytics, be it through their patches, their handheld devices, pharmacies, people that monitor them, their own sort of personal regime. They just eat. They know when they eat. They know what they eat. They somehow manage to keep up. Maybe it doesn't always need to be a high-tech solution to be considered your competition. Crucial is point number 2, substitutability, which is a very fun word. So is it worth the switch? Is it actually going to pay off for me to switch from this technology to another? And switching costs are something that you should always keep in mind. How much is it going to cost me to go from product A to product B? And it's something that's very overlooked. Features that really matter. Often the features that are used as selling points aren't the features that matter to the customer, or often the solutions are over-engineered. And that's why it's really important to understand very early what it is the customers and end users will be expecting. And of course, defensibility. How do I distinguish my defensibility from that of the competition? Although I would say this is a bit more key for sort of internal strategy and also for fundraising, being able to pitch to investors how it is that you are unique relative to the competition. Clever First Aid is an instance of business validation, but also where patent research helped us understand potential market pain point. Now, Clever First Aid is a New Zealand company that develops these very fancy first aid kits, as you can see here before you, that also are able to give you notifications, be it to your phone, to a computer, even sound notifications, when something is missing or has been used, or when it's time to replenish the first aid kit, because theoretically first aid kits have a shelf life. And we were hired by a research team that was trying to develop something similar to do a patent landscape analysis. And through the patent landscape analysis, we found this competitor in Australia and New Zealand where they had patented this technology. Now, maybe for some that may be discouraging, but in this case, it was quite the opposite. By understanding the kinds of features that they had validated already with the industry, by understanding their business model, which, by the way, is selling to McDonald's and Burger King or Hungry Jack's in Australia and other fast food chains, they found there was a real pain point that they could address for an industry. And that was something that was entirely off the radar of the researchers that we were working with. So, through this, we could find, okay, maybe we can't patent this because of the prior art, we can't patent this in Europe and the United States, but also they haven't patented it there either. So maybe there's scope for us to engage in some sort of a joint venture or to commercialize our own version of this in the European market, having already an understanding of the direction in which regulation went in Australia and New Zealand and is likely to come to Europe, and also of the companies and customers that are accustomed to this in another market that maybe now we have an easier sales pitch to. So again, understanding what the competitors are doing can really help speed up your process to market. So the segmentation is key. Not everyone is going to be your client. Current solutions adoption can also be a significant barrier to your entry. People are unlikely to switch. We don't love change at the end of the day, so it really needs to be something that's worth changing for. Different geographies motivate different consumer preferences, and of course, it's really important to understand finally who is buying, and that returns to the whole point of just because you're selling something to a car, the car user isn't going to be your customer. It's going to be Skoda or whoever. And this is a case study that helps exemplify all of those things. So this was a project that we did. The NDA is up, so I can say, for Pilsner Urquell, who was very interested in creating a new business model in which they have these very high-end, sophisticated beer taps. We have one here in the office that we developed with them that is antimicrobial, that is very lightweight, that can ensure that you have the perfect pour. So Czechs are very sensitive about their beer looking like the lower foam and not the top foam here on the image on the right. And that would allow them to have a business model kind of like Nespresso, where they give you the tap for free, and then you have to buy they're very special kegs because they only work with the tap. Now, Pilsner Urquell ended up spending a lot of money on this. We had to drink quite a few beers to help them develop it too. And ultimately, our research of the patent landscape suggested that Heineken and other leading beer companies, but mostly Heineken, have a dime a dozen patents on this exact technology, and that none of them have actually ever been commercialized. So the suggestion was that this be pivoted or this actually be given up on, but the company wanted to pursue. They wanted to build the product and then see how the market reacted, and ultimately the product was somewhat of a failure insofar as we didn't really fully grasp the pain point that it was addressing. Now, most places outside of the Czech Republic, maybe parts of Germany, I don't know, but Belgium, although the beer is slightly different, but most places where lager is drank don't really care about how accurate the foam is. The antimicrobials, well, bars don't tend to be the cleanest places to begin with, so it's not really something that's perceived that much as a pain point. The regulation is pretty clear on what the cleanliness standards are, so it's not like they were helping anyone with the regulatory push either. So ultimately, this just became a nice-to-have product, and it's used mostly by Pilsner Urquell for marketing purposes. It's called the Barney Tap. If ever anyone is looking to purchase something for their home to improve their barbecue game. So again, this was a product that was developed with a lot of money, a lot of time, and not a very significant outcome, and that was because the company, despite all of the inferences from the patent landscape and from the validation, decided to develop this all the same. So that brings us finally to business validation, and I am wary of the time, so I will try to stay within the hour. Business validation comes down to defining your unique selling proposition, your USP. So what do I do that is truly unique, that addresses a problem, and how does it address it in a new way? So that's I guess what you could summarize the unique selling proposition as. And I urge you all to try and define this for yourselves, but also defining the unique selling proposition, which essentially is your hypothesis for different use cases. And it really helps then to do some customer segmentation, to understand, okay, what are the segments in which I think, or the desk research is indicating my technology has the biggest applications, defining sort of 5 or 6 different segments, and then doing, if you will, A/B testing through structured, semi-structured interviews with the right people. It's really essential. I'm often asked, how do you find the right people? And first and foremost, it's through your networks. Remembering that Sam works at Heineken, but I don't know, Tim works at Karlovačko, and then having conversations with them about how they're maybe trying to solve this antimicrobial thing with the beer taps, but then also going to bars and asking them what their expectations are, talking to customers, asking them how much do you care about this foam thing, so really trying to understand from all the different aspects. And it's not only, let's talk to the CEO, let's talk to the person that does R&D. It really, you can find information that can be crucial to your business case under a rock. So it's really important to leave no stones unturned. And the final output of this is to gather as many takeaways as you can. So to validate the market assumptions and the USP assumptions that you had, and then from that to define the next steps. How do I commercialize in this use case? How do I pivot towards the other? Reiterating, excellence is what you're proud of, but USP is what survives contact with the market. So that's ensuring that there's a problem that has a solution. And this is rather illustrative. So defining the pain point, asking yourself at each single step of the way why. This is something that children are very good at because they're just trying to understand the worlds around us. But as we age, we kind of lose track of. So you're running through a red light. Why? Because you're late for work, but in reality, it's because you woke up late, because your alarm didn't work, because you didn't charge your battery. You forgot to check to charge your battery. So that is at the root cause. And this, of course, is part of the scientific method, and I'm sure something that you're all very adept at, but it's something that should also be applied to the business validation interviews. This is an instance of a technology that we helped do some validation for in some market research. It's some of you may be familiar with USIB. It's the University Center for Energy Efficient Buildings, just up the road here from Prague. And this particular solution was initially envisaged as a very high-tech, very engineered air quality assessment device. So you put it on the wall, and it would be connected to your phone, and you could get various air quality metrics in real time. And the application that they decided to use it for was selling it to schools, selling it to office spaces to help them understand perhaps when they should open the window, or if they should invest in maybe better ventilation, if they should call someone to check because there's some fumes, etc. And they found very quickly, because they kind of rushed to the market before they did some real validation, that the feedback was good. Everyone liked it, but people weren't so willing to pay for it. So what we did was we went on Amazon and we found the most sold air sensor on the market. It was a company from China that was selling their products for less than what it costs to put only one of the chips that would be used in this USIB solution. So it was just like a fraction of the price, 10%, 12% of the price. And we, brought it here to Prague. We used it in the office. We realized every so often that it would go off. It would, tell us the air quality is bad. We'd open the windows, we let some air in, and things would change. But then we realized one day with the windows open that it was still going off red. So eventually we opened it up and realized it's nothing more than a randomized timer that goes off ever so often. But the point being here is that it solved the pain point in another way for the customers. The customer was satisfied because they have a sense of control and agency. They know when they should open the windows. And at least in primary schools, and at least in some of these public office spaces, that was more than enough to address it. So the takeaway being here that, again, just because you have the best solution in terms of sort of engineering capacity doesn't always mean that it's exactly the right fit for the consumer. Now, after this validation, the company would pivot. They're now known as Sensomatic, and they do moisture measurements based on the same technology, the same IP. They do measurements of moisture in wood. So if you have a wooden construction, one of our colleagues has this in their house. It can tell you, there's a leak here. There's too much moisture. Maybe go check it out. So the technology wasn't killed per se, but perhaps had they not pivoted, it may have ended up just being a money hole for a little bit longer than it was. So USPs, I know this is one of those gimmicky tools that I'm sure you've seen at a lot of dissemination workshops of various European projects. Sometimes they're a little bit better in their guidance than others, but I really like this USP table. And of course, I'll be sharing this presentation with you afterwards, so feel free to use it. And I think that this is very helpful because it shows you which questions you should be asking at each single step of the way. So understanding your target audience, your competitors, your technology and product features, the customer benefits, what sets you off from the market. And then from that, designing a single, if possible, single sentence, the shorter the better, USP, which effectively forms your hypothesis that then you go and you validate with industry. So I would certainly urge you all to try and write down your USP, using the template to share it with others, to validate it, internally with your peers. And I always like to say, if my grandma or if my sister or my grandpa can understand the USP, then I've really nailed it. If it's clear to a person with absolutely no context, then you're on the right track. Now, structured interviews it's essential that you understand your USP in its entirety, and for that, as I mentioned, it definitely helps to validate it with people but that have no context whatsoever. It is key, I can't stress this enough, to ask open questions that focus on the challenges, almost never to start with the solution or present the solution at all until the very end of the conversation. And again, to understand who is buying, where they're from, and what their preferences may be. I cut myself short a bit earlier talking about relying on your network, also relying on your network's network to find the right nodes for business validation interviews. So friends of friends, colleagues, and ultimately, of course, as well, LinkedIn, and with that LinkedIn Premium, which makes all the world of difference because the search features actually work. Now, our approach to business validation, I'm going to focus on this a little bit more concretely because it really is key, is to create an informal atmosphere first and foremost, to explain that you're not trying to sell anything. Very often I find, that asking somebody to give you some more insight because you're working on a research team that really values their expertise, so stroking their egos a little bit will help them get them to the meeting, but also help them approach this in sort of a casual way that means they want to share with you as much as they can, and even more than you expected or may have gotten out of them with just stark questions. So reassure them that you want to understand their reality. It's very essential. Then focusing on them and what their role is. If they're trying to understand effectively here, are they the right person to talk to, and how much am I going to be able to get out of this? And if not, then asking who else may be involved in the organization or maybe worth talking to. Sometimes these conversations last 3 minutes because you realize, okay, the head of R&D actually has nothing to do with what I'm interested in. I need the head of this specific production line, and then they connect you to them. So focus. Again, the key takeaway here is focus on understanding their priorities, their limitations. Then we move on to problem validation. So determining whether the problem actually exists, how big it is, how often it occurs. So asking questions like, how do you currently address this? What tools do you use? What works well? What doesn't? What is the most challenging part for you personally? And where do complications most often arise? These questions, you'd be very surprised, actually end up being the majority of the conversation, because you ask them how they address something and they say, oh, we're using this, but it's really starting to become expensive and our competitors are moving in this direction and we're kind of struggling to keep up with them. So, it'd be really great if there was a cheaper solution, if there was a faster solution. This is where you begin to have them. Then we get to the I would pay moment. So this is the most valuable moment of the validation. This is when you really understand, you really sort of also put to their knowledge, to make them alert of the fact that they've been talking about a problem. So what would be a signal for you that the solution is worth investing in? What situation would you say you really need to solve this? And who would make that decision? So here you're trying to gauge the depth of their motivation, whether it's internal, external, financial, emotional, whether it's process driven. And then finally, after if the conversation lasts 20 minutes, if you've spent 16, 17 minutes focusing on all of their problems, and they are almost starting to feel frustrated because they've just talked about everything that's wrong in their production line, then you present your USP. Then you say, we're exploring this and it does that and it does that in this way. Do you find this interesting? And if I develop this, what would be crucial for you as a potential KPI that this would need to show? Or, would you have any concerns? Would there be any certificates that you would require? What is the price point that this would have to meet for you to be able to actually consider it? And how difficult would it be to implement this? A very key question, because very often we're talking about, very large processing plants in certain industries, of course, but more so just very complex processes. And understanding how you integrate and building something that can easily be integrated will sometimes make or break your product. So we find that this approach works much better. So focusing first on their expertise, trying to get them involved, get them to open up, have them focusing on their pain points, how they solve things at the moment, what works, what doesn't work, what they'd like to see improved, then presenting at the very end your solution. And this is kind of a hook. And then they're much more likely, I think, to say, okay, well, if this actually solves it, let me see it. And there you'll get into sampling, there you'll get into piloting. It varies from industry to industry, but I would say very often that as a result of business validation, you will have some sort of piloting project or some willingness at least to follow up when it's a bit more developed. Of course, closing then, leaving it sort of open, asking if you can stay in touch, asking if there's somebody else that maybe is worth speaking to, either from their company or from their network, can keep this sort of validation alive and well, and will really help you in the long term. So in the end, there's sort of three conclusions, and that's either we kill the idea, we confirm the idea, or we pivot. Now, I would suggest that you do this in the perfect world before you've spun up from the university, before you spend money deciding, what the IP valuation is, deciding what the license agreement should look like, wasting a lot of time with lawyers and the tech transfer office. I would do this so that you really know exactly what the license use should be. You actually need to have a sense of what the potential valuation should be. You have a go-to-market, and you haven't spent a bunch of money, nor have you left the research academy, the research institute or academia, that is, already. So if you do this sort of at a phase where you're, beginning from TRL 2-3, working it up within the lab to about 6-7, constantly validating with industry, knowing that industry wants this, well, then you have a very clear license of use that you can negotiate with the TTO that you can then spin out or out license to a potential industry partner. This is another great example of validation and how it worked. This was a solution that, with very high precision, would tell people in advance of an oncoming cardiac arrest or some sort of cardiac implication. Of course, the gut drive was to sell this to hospitals and doctors. Cardiologists, they found very quickly, would tell you that they want to buy it, but then they wouldn't buy it. And in secondary interviews, once we stepped in, it was established that a lot of them have a good feeling that they already kind of know that they don't need this tool. So that kind of closed that door. Another door that was closed were the public hospitals. Well, very often the public hospitals, the longer they keep you, in theory, the larger their budget is. So the incentive wasn't fully aligned. But private institutions get paid the same amount of money for your visit from a public provider, sort of regardless of how long they stayed, or at least in some of the countries that we were focusing on, they did. So for the private clinics, it really was, incredibly valuable for the patient to come in on day one, to receive this technology, and then be sent home. So because they would get paid no matter whether the patient stayed 4 or 1 day. So they would strap this Holter on them, send them home, monitor from the clinic privately, not have to use resources on them in the day-to-day. So that would actually end up saving money for them. And that was a pivot that they've made, and they've now quite successfully commercialized it, especially in the GCC, so in the Gulf countries. Finally, I'm aware of the time. Execution is key. So defining commercial strategy that you have validated with industry is really the first and foremost step in any commercialization. Finding a team that is multidisciplinary, that is dedicated, that is willing to dedicate their time and their resources to developing this project is equally essential. And learning to love mistakes, of course, as a final takeaway too. In terms of commercialization strategies, when executing, a lot of these will also be determined by the findings from the validation. So understanding the expectations. In some industries, people will expect you to out-license to them much more often than they'll expect you to develop the solution as a company. A good example may be distinguishing between, the licensing and the spin-off, it being a fine line as well. These days, big pharma is cutting R&D massively because they have realized that a much leaner model is to let startups develop things to sort of, preclinical phase 1 and then just buy it off of them for theoretically less than they would spend on R&D in-house. So pharma actually wants you to very often to spin off to get the technology to a phase where it's significantly de-risked for them so that they can purchase it. But maybe some other industries, for instance, I had mentioned Skoda Auto. Skoda Auto probably doesn't need you to, be developing a new tire. It's good enough for them that you've found a new material that they can then integrate. Although Skoda wouldn't be the company there, would be a tire manufacturer. So it really does depend on the industry to industry and the potential of the technology as well. Contract research, a very effective tool sometimes too. When you have IP, you can keep the story alive by working on specific use case applications with an industry partner. This is highly encouraged. I would caution there though to always make sure that you read the license agreements. Very funny license agreement that came across our desk and we had to help disentangle was a company that paid a research institute for contract research on sound barriers on the highway. And the researchers went out, they were doing the measurements, they compiled the measurements, and in the course of that, they actually discovered a sort of new shape, if you will, or an angle that would significantly improve the sound barriers. Now, they tried to commercialize that new shape configuration. The company that paid for the contract research sued them. And in reviewing the license agreement, it became very clear that all that the company had paid for was actually the copyright to the research, not the actual IP of the research itself. So, be very diligent when you're engaging in contract research, either as a researcher or as a company as well. And finally, there is no shame in giving up. And I think it actually shows very often, at least to VCs, that when a founder tries and gives up, the next time they try, they're going to be much wiser and perhaps not going to make the same mistakes twice. So giving up is not always a red flag. Sometimes it can be green. On team, people really need to work. So it will be a red flag if everyone stays in academia and everyone is sort of a part-time CTO, CIO, CSO, and that's all the competencies you have. So ensure that you have some competence balance, ensure that you have some people that are actually working on the project with a little bit more consistency. It's really good to have also very clear rules. And I mean that not only in terms of, who owns what in terms of equity, but also rules in terms of, who is responsible for which part of the products, which part of the commercialization, which part of the legal aspects, and rules also, very importantly, I haven't touched on it enough today in terms of trade secrets. I see a huge push, often also policy is pushing researchers through the grants to register patents. Patents aren't always the be all and end all. Very often it's much more advantageous, and usually the best companies are those that have very small elements of their portfolio patented and the rest of it maintained as trade secrets and copyrights. So do consider that as well. And I urge you also, when discussing with patent lawyers, to really understand what the business case is that you're patenting, and to ensure that you patent only that which is essential to your business case, not giving away all of the secret sauce, not also patenting something that isn't going to cover your business case, and naturally also to align expectations. I will close on AIfinity. In the interest of time, AIfinity is a company that uses NMR for drug discovery, molecular design. The company's been quite successful. It was approaching sort of a Series A. It had also been a spin out from Mendel University in Brno. Unfortunately, this was a single founder story. And very recently, we had to begin winding up the company because after years of quite successful development, the founders simply found themselves in front of a wall where they sort of held most of the know-how in order to use the technology. They hadn't really imparted it. They hadn't really engaged in enough sales, and it just became too much. And the founder experienced serious burnout. Now, this is only one of many cases in which I've seen this. So I do urge you, not to commercialize at all costs, but also not to commercialize alone. And that goes back to surrounding yourself with a team that really can support you, be it in-house, be it through the technology transfer office, be it through external commercial partners. It's not always the end goal to build a unicorn. Sometimes it's enough to have a spin-off that has several out licenses, and we can all live happily with that. So I hope that this kind of high-level overview, focusing predominantly on business validation, because again, I firmly believe that this is the crux of research commercialization, has been of use to you. I open the floor to any questions, any comments, and certainly if you have any follow-ups afterwards, I would encourage you to reach out to me on my email or on my WhatsApp, which I'm sure we can share afterwards as well. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. Anyone has questions? Okay, I have one question. So at the start, you talked about bailing out or how to say pushing the product till the end. What are telltale signs for bailing out or when you want to push the product either way?
So when should we kill a product? Is that kind of the question?
Yes, what are telltale signs that we should abandon our project?
Yeah, I mean, your mic's muted. You also be saying that everyone else can't unmute their mics. That would, if I understood correctly. So maybe there's
Yes, we must give them permission.
I would say, it's hard to cram all of this into this time, but there's not always a clear instance of when to kill a project. Sometimes the industry feedback will very clearly be telling you nobody wants this or nobody wants this at this price range. It's too cumbersome. It simply isn't easy to integrate. So usually that's why if you start these conversations early, you'll find out that people aren't interested in this. But sometimes it's not as simple as that. I work with one project research team in Zagreb at Ruđer Bošković, and they developed a solution that would have been perfect for COVID, but they developed it just at the end of COVID. So afterwards, everyone was kind of sick of talking about, these kinds of use cases, virus related and whatnot, and there wasn't as much investor appetite. But also the technology wasn't there, so it was focused on, enabling technology such as mass spec, which, as I'm sure a lot of you know, quite expensive, not always available. So it just didn't work perfectly. Now, 2-3 years later, there's nanopore analysis has gotten to a point where it's, a couple €1,000, and now suddenly they again are enabled to be active on the market for a much lower cost, and maybe investors are a bit interested in it. It seems like they're quite interested in it. So there's no simple answer, David, unfortunately. Sometimes what's, great today will suck tomorrow and then be great again. And sometimes there simply are technologies that are part of a greater story that should be out licensed to somebody that's building something a little bit bigger, and they can find their space there. So desk review will tell you everything great, especially nowadays. Everyone's using AI. AI will tell you you have a one and only solution that everyone's going to want. Talk to 20 people from different nodes of industry, and you'll find out maybe some people want this, but they want it to look very specific, and that's really the only way to find it out, unfortunately.
Thank you for your answer. So if anyone has a questions, please raise a hand and I will give you mic permission.
Hello, Alexander. It's Josip. Thank you for really interesting and useful presentation. I have one question. Do you maybe think that for products coming from research institutions or academic institutions such as faculties and so on, is it maybe easier to find industry partner and maybe just charge for license rather than try to open spin-off a startup company, try to get investments and so on? But what is your opinion or maybe even experience on this?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Josip, and thanks for the opportunity to present as well. I would say that it's rather, industry dependent, but it's also a question of preferences. I know of a lot of companies that, maybe should have been out licensed. I know of a lot of out licenses that should have been companies. And sometimes it comes down to the research team, the phase that they're in life, the technology transfer office, and how open they are to actually, letting people spin off. So there are a variety of factors. But that said, I would say that, the complexity of technology is also crucial to this question. In the instance that I was just talking about a few seconds ago, out licensing biotech, it's probably not going to work just from institute level. It can. It's not to say that it can't, but the expectation increasingly from big pharma is that you bring it to a point where they need to take it through clinical trials or maybe phase 2, phase 3, and then that's it. They want you to de-risk the product for them. But if you're talking about maybe some sort of new advanced material, well, then there is a plethora of applications. There are a plethora of companies that could integrate this. And so then out licensing to them for their specific use cases maybe makes a bit more sense. But that's why I think it's really important to understand which industry or which segment your application is the best fit for. And then the industry will very often dictate, what kind of commercial model is predicted or is most desirable.
Thank you. Yeah, I really agree with you. And I would just add one more factor on this, since when I was younger, like PhD student and postdoc, I was highly motivated to start a startup or spin-off company. But now when I'm a bit more older, or we can say more experienced, just lack of time and even maybe a bit lack of motivation to start something from scratch is also a huge factor in making this decision. Yeah, but definitely, as you said, it depends on the type of product and type of industry and so on. Yeah, but in general, I would encourage young people, younger researcher, if they have some idea that has potential, maybe to try with a startup. Yeah, because then award could be much higher than if they sell or license their product to some big company or organization.
True. It's very true. And luckily, I think that the research institutes in Croatia are changing their approach to that too, Josip, which is incredibly encouraging, giving support and also licenses that support the spin-offs. So it's also a system change that needs to happen.
Yeah, and actually we have a proof regarding this, since your company is helping our university and our faculty also to make this huge step in this direction. Yeah, so hopefully soon we will have a clearer guidance and help from experienced companies like yours.
Fingers crossed, yes. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, should we proceed with Andrew's presentation? Thank you, Alexander, for your presentation. It was really insightful about technology transfer.
Thank you, David. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And I assume you can see my screen. Let me just see if I can make it full.
Yep, so far so good.
Okay, so far. Okay, well, I'll have the rest. So this is the same as what I presented a couple of weeks ago, but I've now taken it in light to what we've just heard, and maybe I'll reiterate some of the fight. So what we have is we're an example, maybe one of those examples that you showed earlier on of like deep research, which has sort of come out and we've spun out. So it's academic research to entrepreneurship, and I represent a company called MegaSense. I'm like the CTO of MegaSense, but at the same time, I was senior researcher at the computer science that helped sort of formulate this product within the University of Helsinki. So for about 4 or 5 years. So I have a sort of view of everything. So that's why it's academic to research. I'm not going to go through all these slides, but what I would like to do is, again, I think you mentioned the team. Now, to me, the team is number one. So whenever you you start a startup or you decide to do a spin-out company, the founders now are the most important people. And from our understanding, a founder only has one job. So a founder is the purpose of a founder is to get funding. So to get funding, to get investment for your company to survive. So every person who's a founder should be able to go out to sell the product, to get investment. So it's not just about presenting the technology. It's like presenting the technology so you get funding. So you always have this sort of purpose of why you're explaining this to different audiences. You're literally a salesman. So every founder is a salesman. That's it, for the company to enable it to survive. Now, here, when we started this MegaSense, now MegaSense is sort of air quality, and it's great that we heard about air quality example earlier on. But of course, we know that air quality is a major issue globally. So we don't really need to explain about air pollution or the effects of air pollution on health and on the biosphere and on the biodiversity. So it's well known. Now, one of the issues that we had is that when you start a research project, the founders you can think of are the professors. Here we're quite lucky. We started this research off for multidisciplinary research in 2018, and we had a professor from computer science, one from atmospheric science, who's very well known in his field, and one in geoscience. And we sort of pulled that information together to create this sort of air quality solution called MegaSense. And we actually had right from the beginning, we had a good, let's say, interest in what we were doing. So, for instance, in China, they were interested in sort of seeing what we could do for their 5G technologies. And we had early applications already developed, like clean air navigation. And we sort of made some small programs. Now, so initially in the research, the sort of founders of the professors, they're a good fit to sort of get going, and then these founders are sort of very good for getting what we call soft funding or public grants. So we for the MegaSense to create what we wanted to create, we had a very good research team. We had a very high level of outreach. Here's a sort of mayor of Beijing, but who came to see what we were doing. We had some seed funding from the university. We had good interactions with the city of Helsinki, good interactions with Business Finland, who are sort of the state government project that supports this time of activity with Nokia. And so what we did, and it's very much in this sort of NextAIRE, the program that we're working in here. We created sensors, we created models, and we created sort of AI-based calibration research, and we also have a good sort of relationship with Brussels, and we sort of made a sort of impact on the sort of new black carbon sort of new regulations that are due to come out. So it's all very good, and these professors are there trying to sort of using their networks. So the founders and the networks is what you've said. So their networks is very powerful. Their networks right across Europe and right across the globe, actually, in this field. But during this sort of from creation of models and devices, we did learn a lot. I mean, one thing we did learn is that the small devices that you mentioned, the ones that you put on the walls, but in general, small handheld devices that people make are really a no-go for most people. So most people do not really want to walk around with an air quality sensor. So we created these air quality sensors, very sort of smart and connected to your mobile phone and told you everything. But in general, we done this project for a couple of years, and we interviewed 100 people, and they said, well, it's really nice, but I don't really want to carry around an air quality sensor, and I don't really want to look at the data either, because I don't fully understand what it's telling me. So these are sort of a learning that we sort of thought about. So the first point I would make is who are your founders and can they get the sort of funding? That's what the founding's funding, and they did. Now, when it comes to the founders' problem fit, so those professors who sort of started this project, well, we have a problem, and it's well known. So air pollution is expensive and it's deadly, and we have like 9 million global deaths linked to air pollution globally. It has a huge economic cost, $5 trillion, and we know that 56 or 60% of the world live in cities that are sort of exposed to poor air quality. So we don't really need to go around the different parts of the world to explain the problem of air quality. So we had a good sort of problem fit those founders, and then we started as a sort of research to work on the problem. So we have the air quality issue. We need to identify the different types of pollution, and so our approach then is not to create more expensive instruments, but to create these low-cost handheld devices, the ones that I said that once we created that, the people said they didn't really want to carry them around. But we've done that in-house. We've done the multi-sensor calibration with reference devices, and we created a patent for that. And we still do this, actually. We still do this as a research. We're now doing radiation. We're creating small devices to measure radon and a few of those other types of radiation that have detrimental effects. And we created new virtual parameters and proxy models, black carbon, and we created this navigation for people on their phones, and we have lots of publication. So our problem to this, when we started off as a research, was to make devices and to make a sort of app that sort of people could use. And that was our problem in the research area. But then when we come to the market, we initially, as research, we can find a market. So we have a market for us is a consortium. So we have a bunch of sort of partners that come together and we work together. So here we have some projects, and University of Helsinki, City of Helsinki, and Elisa. Elisa's a telecom operation. So we work together, and in a way, the founders have sort of found the market. We also had other projects funded by the EU, of which we had the Finnish Meteorological Institute, Vaisala, who are making devices, and some other partners. So that was successful, and that was for about 4 million euros. And then Business Finland, who are like the government agency, we had a sort of consortium working with them, with Nokia, Gasaria, Finnish Meteorological Institute, and some smaller companies. So in a way, everything we were doing in the research bubble sort of fitted. So we had the founders, who are the professors, and the research team working, attracting investments, attracting public funding. Then we had this sort of real problem, which everyone acknowledges. And then we created a product, which are these little devices. And then we tested those products with companies within Finland. So you could say the market fit is okay. But then as time passes, then we realized that, if I can just get this up. Yes, as time passes, we actually got this founders market fit, but we started to learn, and this is this pivot that we heard about earlier on. Although our little sensors, which we still sort of make and we still understand how they work, and we still expand what they did, we sent them, or some of them were purchased by different universities, and Kazakhstan bought some, the University of Edinburgh, they bought 50 of them, and we've done some collaboration activities in India. But one thing we learned, and it's a little bit like this dealing with hardware, is that it's very difficult really to make a business out of hardware. And if people don't really want to carry them, what we found is when we sent them to a city, they had a problem of where do they put these devices. It's not easy to start measuring, even though there's a problem. So then it was our pivot, and our pivot then, when we was working with the UN Habitat and UNEP, is we will start to do modeling. There are air quality models out there, but we have a particularly high resolution model, and here we start to do a model for cities like Quito. This is at 200 meters grid, and with resolution, taking in traffic and data simulation and the official monitoring stations and other low-cost sensor providers. So we take all this data and we provide the city view for different cities, and it's large scale. And the good thing about this sort of pivot is that these models are relatively inexpensive to run. It just needs computational power and understanding of data simulations, but also an understanding of the problem itself, because we know about air pollution, we know about meteorological variables. What happens when the wind changes, or the speed of the wind, or what happens to the deposition if it's a bit wet or if it's a bit dry. So we have this, and so that was the pivot of that. So we pivoted from small devices to models, and we included some AI in the early days of this. Now, but then we had this sort of spin out. Now the spin out, so the technology transfer. Now this is the interesting part, and I think it's for the audience here. So we've had this research, of which we had the founders, which are the professors. We had the research team, started about 2018, and by 2022 it was decided by the university that we'll create a spin-out company. So MegaSense was established at the end of 2022. I think they had this sort of fear of missing out, because we could do these city models at a relatively low cost, and pretty much all cities seem to need this, and they still do, because they don't really have a good view of what's happening on an hourly basis at 100 meters resolution across that city, and we can do it for almost every city in the world if we have enough computational power. So therefore we had the formal registration and setup process. There's compliance with the Finnish tax framework. Now, then the cap table, which I'll say a few words, and the equity distribution, the government structures, who's on the board and who's the shareholders, and then generally you set up a process of governance for general meetings and reporting requirements. Now, for those who are sort of following this through, and it is an interesting journey to create a startup, but it's very important that you understand these types of parameters. So when you set up the company, the formal registration is very straightforward. They've reduced the bureaucracy across the EU, so it's quite straightforward to do that. Now, you have to really understand your tax framework, because in Finland it is a high tax country. I don't know what it's like in Croatia and Serbia, but in Finland they start taxing you from day one. They call it capitalization tax and VAT, and so unless you really go and talk to someone, they tax you even at pre-revenue. So from after setting up the company, you're in debt to the Finnish taxpayer, because what they do is they tax you and refund you. So which is fine for them, but not fine for a startup company. So you really need to understand your tax laws. As I said, it may be easier in Serbia and in Croatia, but it's not so easy in Finland. So you really have to understand that, and you need to explain to them what pre-revenue is, because in many governments they expect a company to be set up to be earning straight away. That somehow you're earning, and that's fine, they can tax you. But in deep tech, we have a long cycle of no earnings, pre-revenue, that's what they call, as you build up your network of customers. So that's one massive learning, is this understand your tax. Now, another massive learning I would say to the audience is understand your capitalization table structure and equity distribution. For MegaSense, we've made some really bad mistakes here. And the reason why is the capitalization table means that when you set up your company, who are the shareholders of that company, that startup? Now, because we've come out of the research, of course, these professors, they want to be part of the cap table. Now, this is a sort of spin out process. So here we have professors there, they sort of feel an ownership to this research, and this is a problem that I think happens all the time when you come out with a university spin out. Those who are sort of part of the research, sort of, let's say, the breakthroughs, or they actually spent time thinking and writing some papers, they think they have an ownership of that product, and so they want to be on in the startup company. They want to be on a capitalization table. They want to be shareholders. But in Finland, and I don't know how it is in other European universities, they have a dual role. They have their professorship, so they're not going to give up their professorships, and often they don't want to sort of challenge. I can't say the word, but they can't have a favoritism for your company and for their existing research. And so what you get is you get professors or researchers on your capitalization table who don't actually work for the company, who are shareholders and who are founders, but are not actually part of the processes of being the founders' funding fit. So they don't go out, like I said. Every one of them should be out marketing the company, selling the company to their extensive networks, and getting the business, getting the revenue. But so professors, researchers, those who want to stay within the university sort of framework, if you have a startup, keep them away from your capitalization. Who owns your company, keep them away. You can have them as advisory shareholders, or you can have them as an advisory board, of which they would get paid for, but keep them away from your company, because although they're nice people that you've worked with and they're well recognized in their fields, they do not help you with the everyday sorts of operational costs of how to pay for the office, how to employ people, how to pay for the employers, how to go and talk to many different companies, many different investors, of which maybe 10 or 15% are really interested, but the rest of them are not. So professors don't have that time, or are not willing to do that. So as I said, in different countries it's different. In other Baltic countries, the university doesn't take a share of your company. So the University of Helsinki also takes a share of our company, and all of that creates what we call is a very bad cap table. And why the cap table is important is because when you go to a funding round and you go to a VC or a seed investor, they will say, who's working for the company, who's on your cap table. And if they see like 4 or 5 people who are not actually working for the company, then it's a bad decision for them to join that cap table, because if your company makes money, half the shares are going to go to people that have never done any work for the company. So I would say that this founders funding fit is super important, if not the most important, is that you have the founders, you go out and you make a success of your company. So in reality, there's me, and then there's a guy called Oliver who's like an investor. We are the real people that actually work in MegaSense. We have 4 people who are passive, who do not, and that creates an issue for us. So it creates an issue for when you go for the next round of investments. So I would say that. And then another thing about the team is when you bring in a founder, I think everyone needs to understand what you actually do. What problem are you solving? Because we have, for instance, Oliver Waring, who's really an investor. He's not a CEO, and he doesn't fully understand what we're doing, because when you think about air quality and how it affects the body, it's like people understand it, but they don't understand it. So and when you talk to cities and you want to make a big deal with them, they can see that this founder doesn't really understand your product that very well, but I know it, and our employees who don't get the options here, they know it. So be careful that when you have a founder, that everyone actually knows what you're doing. I mean, you could have a founder who's dealing with the marketing, but he or she would still need to know what this product is solving, as mentioned before. Are you really solving this issue? So I think for me, it's the team, it's the founders. in an ideal world, every person here is out there selling MegaSense and getting business for us, but that doesn't really happen. We did get some private investment. We had this, and we did get some support from the university for conferences. Our investor, who's investor is someone who sort of, what they do is they own a lot of vans and they hire them out to different institutions in the UK, like British Rail or the airports. And they were looking at MegaSense as more of an ESG type solution, that they could sort of get some ESG returns from this. And as I said, that they were investing in MegaSense, but they didn't really understand what we do, and that's an issue now. So now we have an investor who doesn't fully understand what we do. So your investor, if they're on your founders table, just make sure that you're in the right sort of domain, because when you go to talk to people, like we are talking to people in different cities like Los Angeles, they know their air quality issues, and if they're going to invest in you, they need to know that everyone in your team also knows what their problem is. We have we're part of the NextAIRE funding support, of which we're here, and we made some funding, and we are now talking to Clean Air Fund, who are quite interested in what we do. So but there are challenges in being pre-revenue. So I think and again, we don't have a founder's problem fit. So when we go out to discuss this with the different cities, we know that there's deaths due to air pollution, both indoor and outdoor, and we know it has a cost, and we know that there's not enough monitoring stations across the EU, and these small devices, really add value if you can make them pay. So what our sort of problem solution fit is that we have a weather-driven solution. Everything is deep tech. We run this at very high resolution. We take traffic data and we do the hourly predictions and forecast pollution hotspots, and we also support academic studies, and then we can turn this data into an app. So so people can have an app and they can get high resolution air quality for the different pollutants whenever they want when they deal with this. But so we have a rich sort of portfolio. We still deal with these small devices, and there's still a lot of interest in these small devices, but there's really no money in this. The real money is in the deep tech and in the AI. There is a sort of growth of interest in small devices, so we always have people asking for it, and at the moment we're part of this EU radiation monitoring using small devices, and we have an IP for it, but we can never really make business out of these small devices. As mentioned, China will always do it cheaper, not 10 times cheaper, but 100 times cheaper than these devices made in Europe. So the best way for us to go is to go with the modeling, with very high accurate modeling that's dealing with the data. So I think I'll stop there, and I would just say that listening to what we said before, that at least for us, we don't have an issue with the problem fit, how we solve the problem, or what the problem is, defining that, and how we solve that. We have very high resolution. We have interest from different cities in the US and Silicon Valley. We have interest in the GCC and what we do because it's super low cost. But we have a serious founders funding fit because our cap table is full of passive users. And so now we have to we now have a discussion quite soon on how do we sort of rectify that. We do have an IP package for calibration patent, but we found out that really that's not that useful for devices. It sounds quite useful to calibrate them, but it's very difficult to prove when you actually go out in the marketplace to know who's using calibration and who's not. And that calibration patent is very much linked to the professors, and that's why they think they have an ownership of our company. So I would recommend that. I don't think it just has to be a young person. Anyone who wants to do something should go out and create their startup, but create it in a sort of, with someone like me or someone who's done it before, to warn them of the pitfalls of spinning out of a university. But then once you come out, then you have a lot of people who are really seriously interested in what you do, so long as you start off well. I think that's it. Any questions or comments? I can stop sharing. Yep, Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you. That was very interesting presentation. You touched on a lot of things, I think, complementarily that I overlooked in mine or passed over, especially about the passive cap table. I could not agree more. Too often I see a lot of spin-offs that have 15 CTOs and CSOs, and it's fine maybe up to seed round, but then afterwards the investors want them to be cleared out. And the taxation also resonates too, although I must say in Croatia, it's not all that straightforward, especially when it comes to employee stock options. Very often companies are setting up in Delaware or doing all sorts of contract loopholery to get around it. But my question pertains to the role of the university and how much equity they actually take, or what kind of deals they are giving, maybe generally speaking, if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the University of Helsinki, they don't have a long experience in this startup sort of business, because the startup business in universities is relatively new. You have some universities who have been doing it for a long time, and many that haven't. So their equity they were taking was 25%. So they're taking 25% of the company, and then you have the professors who sort of take about 25% again. So again, we almost have 50% of dead equity in our company. And so now we've been complaining and talking about that. So we'll have a discussion on the university releasing that equity and giving up their shares. But we don't know about the professors. But yeah, it's very high.
Yeah, thank you. That's immensely high.
Yeah.
The direction that things are going in Croatia is sort of 5 to 7% non-voting, not even equity shares, but virtual shares. So, it's more of a contractual right. If you do manage to get that EIC accelerator, I'd love to follow up, because we're accelerator partners. So you can also access our services with some discount, but we can cross that bridge when you get there. Fingers crossed for you.
Yeah. And thank you very much. And then I think what they do for you, how do they earn that 25% is not very much. So they provide us. We have this big event called Slush in Finland, in Helsinki, every year. It's a big event. So they provide us tickets for that, and sometimes a stand. But they don't do very much, and they could do a lot more. And so that's why we don't mind if they took 25%, if they gave 25% of service to us, but they don't. And that's the same with the professors, that we don't mind giving them equity if they promote the company, but many times they feel like it's a conflict of interest, because they're professors and they have to be neutral in what they do, and then so they can't promote the company. So there's no point having a professor on your board, or at least your cap table, unless they're willing to take that risk of conflict of interest.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions? Anyone, please raise your hand.
Maybe I could ask a question. Is anyone in the audience sort of thinking about spinning out or making a startup? I know Alexandra has that big experience with the accelerator, but how about in the audience? Okay, well, it doesn't seem to be, but as I said, we have a big learning, but I'd still recommend you as a researcher to consider starting out with a spin out, but under the right conditions. Because I think everyone here is working with atmospheric science and air pollution, and the biggest, I guess, the new trend is this physics-driven AI. So as we know that the AI using ChatGPT and the large language models just for information is very useful if you're a lawyer or someone dealing with information, records. But the really big thing for AI is useful AI, and useful AI sort of takes physics, everyday physics, and could convert them to something useful that also is connected to that. And I think air pollution is an area which could expand there. So if you can connect working with small devices, instruments, or real data with some AI models, in the different areas, either gases or particles or radiation, or you mentioned moisture or temperature, I think there will be opportunities in the near future in this field. And I say that because I was in Silicon Valley in April, and there's quite interest in what we do, because it's always about, can you do this at low cost? Because cost is a big driver. And at the moment, most of air quality monitoring is too expensive, too clumsy, or the data's not easy to understand. And so whenever there is something of a high cost, that's always an opportunity. And whenever the data is very complex, that's also an opportunity to simplify. With air quality, as I said, that you have gas, you have particles, you could connect to climate change, and then you have emissions of radiation. So there's a lot of opportunities for someone who understands that, who mixes making measurements with AI type of forecasts.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Alexander. It was a nice presentation from both of you. Thanks everyone for coming. We are planning the fourth workshop for the second week of the next month. It will be about IP. Once again, thanks everyone for joining in this workshop, and we will see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for meeting you, Alexandra. It's good to meet you. Okay, and to the rest.
Likewise, a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for the time today. Have a great day.
Yep, have a great day. Cheers. Enjoy the summer.